From Informa TechTarget, I'm David Essex, and this is Enterprise Apps Unpacked. Procurement may not be the sexiest business process, but it is one of the most important. Choosing the right suppliers, especially direct suppliers that make the parts that go into products, from sticky notes to staplers to jet engines, is truly mission critical. Then communicating with them, negotiating the best deals, keeping track of price lists and delivery dates, lining up alternative suppliers. It's a complex, data-intensive process that involves dozens, hundreds, sometimes thousands of suppliers exchanging information, making decisions, and executing transactions across different enterprise applications. You can see why agentic AI that is smart enough to make sense of all that information, communicate it in plain English, but also make decisions, learn and set goals, could take over many of the sourcing and procurement tasks that people normally handle. Globality makes a cloud-based procurement platform that's partially automated with agentic AI and generative AI. It's been developing the application and training its AI data model for more than 10 years. The vision is to make AI agents that can increasingly act on behalf of customers. Keith McFarlane, the Chief Technology Officer, talks about all of this in the podcast. Besides explaining how the software works, the steps in the procurement process that the AI can handle, and which parts the human in the loop still handles, he talks about the importance of trust in AI. People have to be able to trust that the AI won't make a mistake that could cost millions of dollars. There are ways to engineer trust into the software, but you also need policies and procedures. We talk about trust around the middle of the podcast, and since agentic AI can take over so much of procurement, we then get into what that's doing to people's jobs and how it could evolve as the AI learns how to take over more and more tasks. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to Enterprise Apps Unpacked for the real story on the software that runs your business. Thanks for coming on the podcast, Keith.
Of course, really glad to join you. Thank you for the invitation.
Sure. Your PR firm's pitch for this interview said that procurement is one area where agentic AI is proving to be transformative. Can we start with an explanation of in what way is it transformative?
Yeah, that's, I think, solid question. I mean, I look at it from the opposite perspective, then I'll pursue it exactly as you asked. But there's almost no way in which it will not transform procurement or any other industry. And I'm convinced of that. What we're seeing is that across all of the elements of procurement, be it indirect procurement, be it direct procurement, and those two terms that your audience may not be as familiar with, but that's the idea of the things that we buy to run the company versus the things that we buy to add to products, for example, direct versus indirect. And whether it's within the direct or indirect disciplines, whether it's negotiation, certainly every aspect of procurement will be transformed by agentic AI. The reason is that, rather than just, for example, applying AI as, we and many other companies did in the early days of our existence, to spot very specific problems with, well-known confined answers, we're talking about a technology that can reason, and to an extent, and that's, of course, it's debatable what the word reasoning means in the context of large language models and agentic AI. But beyond just reasoning, apply solutions to problems in place of a user, meaning on their behalf. So anything you can imagine the user needing to do, especially tasks that seem like grunt work, things that seem like, a high cost activity that could be done by someone with less skill, could be farmed out to agentic AI. You'll see all of those elements begin to take on an agentic flavor.
It seems like procurement is one of those processes that is particularly well suited to automation by agentic AI. Can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, we actually have been talking about this for, the 10 years we've been in existence. What are the things about procurement that make AI in general, and now particularly agentic AI, very applicable? And one of the big ones is that most of procurement relies on this deeply contextual text or deeply contextual conversation. It relies on large volumes of big documents that contain descriptions of projects or companies or of potential suppliers. And large language models, to begin with, they're language models, right? They are very good at dealing with this kind of text at large volumes. You apply techniques like retrieval augmented generation to index those large volumes of text and bring them into the context of the large language model. Then you can apply all of that context to the procurement problem at hand. It's, I guess, a very specific skill of the procurement personnel that we have today of dealing with all of that volume. And in order to help, an agentic AI must apply, the strengths of the large language model to deal with all that text and find what we think of as complex intent behind all of that text and meaning.
I think you've already kind of answered it, but I'm wondering if there's other things that agentic AI can actually do better than humans. And I don't know if that involves maybe sifting through a lot of the information to identify the best suppliers, or maybe even as far as negotiating terms.
Yeah, I think it's a tricky question, right? Because, this is one that tends to generate a lot of discourse in the media and the various forums. But I would say that it starts with what you just mentioned. It starts with things like scraping text out of documents, understanding that complex intent we discussed. It starts with going off and running a research project on a supplier. If you've ever used ChatGPT's deep research capability, you know what I'm talking about. It'll run off, take your guidance, and execute for, who knows, 30 minutes, an hour, find as much information as possible, rationalize it, and present it to you. In our case, we're doing that very specifically in the context of procurement. So you can send off a request to, for example, as an automated category agent function, could send off a request looking for not just supplier information, but should cost information. How much should a project cost? And bring that in as context and present it up to the user as part of a response. So you can imagine all of those high time, sort of high value, but also very labor intensive tasks being farmed out to agentic AI, making the value of every individual procurement person that much higher. But you mentioned negotiation. That is thought of, I think, as a very uniquely human skill, right? Now, imagine a procurement professional imbued with every book about negotiation ever written, imbued with many, many examples of both successful and unsuccessful negotiations, imbued with all of the world's knowledge about negotiation, and giving that procurement professional a little bit of guidance. So what if that professional was just driven by what is latent in large language models? That's what an AI agent would do in negotiation, right? And we've seen this. We've actually implemented this. An AI agent takes all of its latent knowledge about negotiation, applies that to the guidelines supplied by a procurement professional, and gets to what many would consider an optimal result.
What does the Globality platform do? It's probably an unfair question because it probably does a lot, but what are some of the main functions of your platform?
Right. So from the beginning, and just kind of to give a second to the backstory, from the beginning, Leo Delgo, Joel Hyatt, they get together, they look at this procurement space, and they realize that among the many spaces that have not yet been touched by AI as it existed 10 years ago, mind you, procurement hadn't been affected just yet, right? And there were many spaces that also saw this effect. And at the time, 10 years ago, the technologies perhaps were not even close to the level that we're seeing today. But Joel and Lior saw that procurement problems could be solved by AI in ways that no one had yet imagined. So they began the process of addressing this space. And what is the space? Well, in our case, it's the sourcing space. When I say sourcing, what I'm meaning is finding the best possible supplier at the best possible price for any given procurement need. It could be, I mentioned indirect earlier. It could be something like, having a management consulting firm come in and decide the best shape of your organization. It could be something like a direct spend purchase. I need resin, plastic resin to build out casings, moldings. It could be what we refer to as tail spend. And tail spend is really just it's the little things that you buy that amount to 80% of the purchasing activity at 20% of the price, meaning things like staplers or small software items for a team, the things that largely don't get addressed and where a lot of savings can take place. All of these sourcing elements must be competed. They must be competed properly and with the right intelligence in order to get savings that haven't been realized. And that's what the Globality platform does. That's what Glow does. Is it enables that competition with both its own actions and with the insights that are required by the procurement professional to make the right decisions based on Glow's recommendations.
So, where does the platform fit in the overall ecosystem of this kind of software, especially like the procurement modules that big systems like SAP S/4HANA and Oracle Cloud ERP have, or even the separate spend management platforms like Coupa?
Right. The best way to think of us is a best of breed for sourcing. Certainly within, SAP Ariba, within Coupa, there are sourcing modules. We've focused ourselves on the sourcing problem to give that problem a far better solution. So we integrate directly with Ariba, we integrate directly with Coupa. We also integrate with a number of what we call intake systems. They're more orchestration oriented. Think of ZipHQ, think of Oro Labs. These are systems that will drive a workflow through an organization, but will hand off at a point in time at which sourcing needs to take place. So in all of those cases, number one, yes, we integrate. Number two, we take the job over when sourcing is involved.
What kind of integration work is involved in getting your platform to work with these other things? And it may be integration that was either done by your company or maybe a system integrator partner or even the ERP vendor or customer, because my sense is that there is often an integration aspect to this kind of tool.
Actually, with every one of our customers, we end up with a level of integration because that's where you really get the value is by ensuring that all the information that you can provide to the system prior to a sourcing event ends up in Globality, and any process efficiencies that we can introduce by, for example, integrating to automatic PO generation or PR generation, purchase requisition or purchase order generation is in place. So our integration jobs tend to take on the order of weeks rather than months because we pursued a configuration over coding methodology, and we produce a really simple but powerful public API with webhooks and everything you might expect. So it's possible for a customer's IT organization to do the integration. We certainly have our end of it, but it's generally configuration and flipping a switch or two on our side. It is also possible and frequent that a system integrator will come into play and put the integration together on the customer's side. But there again, it just doesn't take that much time because it's a very well-formed integration platform.
Can you run us through a typical sourcing process and explain how the AI and the human interact to carry out that process effectively?
Yeah, sure. That's fun. So a fun example, I guess, might be, let's say you were setting up a new recording studio. Let's say that you don't want to do all the purchasing yourself. You don't want to do all the work yourself. You don't want to, build a studio that is capable of doing things like, a sufficient cushioning to prevent inbound noise, all this sort of stuff. You're going to hire some experts to do that. So what might you do? Well, first you have to define the project. You have to define all of the variables that might go into the project. What do I need? I need certain kinds of equipment, high-end microphones. I need someone to put some sort of a compensation for sound in the walls, insulation. I need a number of things. I might want to rent a new space. All of these are problems that can be solved by some external organization, some supplier. But how do you choose the supplier? In defining the project and getting the specifics of the project right, you start with, in our case, collaboration with Glow to ensure that, number one, yes, all of the questions that are required to be answered within the project itself are answered. And number two, you're not missing any questions. Glow, in that case, will come up with more questions that are relevant to ask suppliers that maybe you didn't think of, which is just a boon for our customers. I mean, in the early days, when we were watching customers and the way they procured, And if you've ever been through an RFP, you know that there are, sometimes legions, 5 tabs with 100 questions each to get through in many of these cases. What Glow will do, and this is where the agentic AI comes in, is understand the problem you're trying to solve and tune the questions to that problem, tune the requests of each supplier to that problem so that you're asking the right questions. That's where that, that reasoning, or, what we think of as reasoning in agentic AI comes in, is it's thinking through, to an extent, the problem at hand and asking the right questions. So once you have a statement of the problem in hand, once you have that statement ready to hand off to whatever supplier might come along to investigate it or to attempt to get the business, that's when we have to make some decisions about who to invite to bid on the project. Who is it you want at the table? Do you want 3 suppliers? Do you want 10 suppliers? Do you want to emphasize an all-in-one supplier that might be able to do the whole job for you, setting up the studio? Do you want to farm that job out to 5 different suppliers that take different bits of the work, and which could accomplish each of those missions? Well, that's where, again, Agentic AI and Glow have a hand in determining what that list should be, right? We've already talked a little bit about this notion of category management. So the agent, or, Glow in this case, can look at the supplier database that we've got in place, can look at the internet, can determine the best potential matches based on that complex intent we talked about, can scrape through in many documents to determine what suppliers, what individuals, etc., might be able to satisfy each part of that request, each element of the project. So now you've got, say, 10 suppliers that could potentially bid. They come to the table with their proposals. So at this point, we're going to evaluate the proposals, but we don't have to do that on our own. We've got Glow in our corner. Glow takes a look at each of the proposals, at the cost breakdowns, takes a look at should cost estimates from the global market for this world. How much should a microphone cost? How much does it generally cost to build a studio with sound insulation? That sort of information is a powerful lever for the negotiation process and for determining whether or not a supplier is going to be capable, let alone bid, but be capable of doing the work that you're asking them to do. And once you get to the point where, you believe that, say, 5 of the recommended suppliers might be able to do this job, now you're going to ask for a price. You're going to try and negotiate a cost. And then you're going to do that in the context of, you're a premium supplier. What are the premium things you take to bring to the table versus you're a value supplier? Why is it I should trust your work? Now, you don't have to ask those questions alone because you have a technology like Glow to help you ask those questions and ask the right questions, and to use the analytics that have been provided to you by Glow and the recommendations that have been provided to you by Glow, where to precedent negotiation, how much this should cost, etc., to get to the right answer. You make an award, and suddenly Glow's driving the process of pushing the main procurement system or whatever system you're integrated to issue a purchase request or just straight up a PO. So at every point along the journey, you've had AI in your corner, Glow in your corner, helping you make the right decisions, helping you negotiate with suppliers and get to that ultimate and optimal result. And that's where we see, generally speaking, the value that our customers are expecting is, at all of those elements in the process, we're able to optimize using agentic AI.
So, how much of what goes on in your platform is not necessarily AI, but what I might call old-fashioned workflow or business process management, or even like robotic process automation, which, as we know, a lot of it actually doesn't really have, it's really very rules-based and, it's just following rules, doesn't really have AI. Is that what handles a lot of the process from end to end, or is it mostly the AI?
Yeah, that's really relevant for this discussion across this industry as it emerges. I think you see a lot of the competition doing exactly this, doing the sort of the enhanced workflow thing, and there's value to that, right? In walking through a strict workflow that may have very well defined rules, decision points, essentially a decision tree that can take actions at certain points, right? But it's brittle, right? It can't flex in the face of new information. And this is where, our preference, right, and the way our platform works is to imbue more agency into the agents, to allow for an agent to actually run the show, right? For example, in the scoping process, the agent's deciding whether or not to add more or fewer questions. During the analytics generation process, the agent's deciding, hey, do I need to present a pie chart or a bar graph, or what would be the optimal way for the user to see this information? So in our case, we are leaning heavy on the notion that if we provide a safe and secure environment and we allow the agents to access the tools they need to access with the right set of context and prompts, we will get to the optimal result. So in our case, far less workflow, far more agentic agency, if you will.
I know you're passionate about the importance of trust in AI. What does trust mean specifically in the context of AI?
Yeah, that's a really, really important question as well. So I go back to Hippocrates, do no harm, right? Let's begin there. Anything an agent does has to be for the good of the user, the company, the common good, and you must ensure that an agent is operating within guardrails. So the way we do this is we have an agentic framework that, yes, imbues the agents with this agency we talked about, allows agents to make decisions based on their reasoning of a situation and all the context they're given, but also prevents them from executing out of bounds. So we, within the bounds of our tools, the tools that we provide to an agent, and these are little just bits of software that, for example, will go off and query a database or will read a document, etc. There are restrictions we put in place. There are guardrails within those tools that prevent the agent from doing anything that we would recommend against, from doing anything that is prohibited. We find this extremely important. Now, beyond that, and this goes for everything we do in the AI realm, we provide for complete human governance of every step. Everything that we build that has anything to do with AI, everything that we purchase that has anything to do with AI goes through a governance process to ensure that the tools themselves, to ensure that the application of those tools, to ensure that every single word and every single prompt has had a look by an expert, by legal experts, by AI and security experts, to ensure that everything we do is trustworthy. So it's multidisciplinary, and it takes a lot of thought and planning, but we believe we've got the right formula for that, and our customers trust what we do.
I read that Globality has spent a decade training its AI models. How much does the agentic AI still need to be then trained by the user? Or is most of the user's expertise and work directed at, let's say, writing good prompts for the AI?
In our case, Glow comes out of the box with the capabilities needed. The users don't spend their time training Glow. Glow starts with that base foundation knowledge from the foundation models that we're using, and is imbued with a context that allows it to make the right decisions and take the right actions. Users certainly benefit from all of that context and all of that previous training, that prior art. So there's, like I say, there's very little that the user has to do coming onto the platform to tune the solution. The solution will, over time, of course, tune itself and get better, but it's ready day one for the user.
There are studies that document the cost savings from using your platform. What are some of the highlights from that research? And I'm wondering also where the savings come from. Is it mostly from the better prices, other terms for the goods and services?
Yeah, that's one of my favorite examples is HP. We love working with HP. HP is just a brilliant partner in this, and they are pulling out all the stops to get the most of savings from the procurement function, and just like everything else in HP. I mean, I'm a big fan. What they have been able to do with Glow is they've been able to achieve a 10 to 15% savings on all the projects coming through the platform. And that's just getting started. I mean, really, we're moving more and more projects through with them and seeing that savings come through. They estimated on the order of, just for the first year of use, $80 million of savings, based on the fact that they're applying agentic AI in the person of Glow to this sourcing function. And like I said, we're not even all the way through that project. We're just getting started getting their spend on the platform. So beyond that, I mean, if you're thinking about process efficiency, I look at a customer like British Telecom, and I see what they've done to reduce their what we call time to market. So how long it takes to define a project, define an event, and get it into the hands of suppliers, right? Get it into the hands of those who will do the work for bidding, et cetera. And they've gone from something like 10 days worth of effort to 1 day, 10 to 1, regardless the metric, is a huge change, right? And just imagine the efficiencies that allows you to capture. Just imagine the amount of work that you can add to the team. Imagine digging into the backlog that every procurement organization has to get more and more value out of all the projects. Both of those dimensions, be it cost, be it efficiency, all of them are positively impacted by agentic AI in this case.
So earlier in the questions I sent you, I asked about reduced labor costs. It sounds like you were just kind of alluding to them at the end there, talking about how the team can be more productive, essentially. Is some of that factored into how you calculate the ROI of using your platform?
Absolutely, yes. Absolutely. Much of the way we think about the problem is this. There is with every procurement organization, there's a tremendous backlog of projects that just aren't going to get a look. I mean, I remember working in a large company in my previous days, dealing with procurement organizations that were completely overtasked. I wanted to get a piece of software for my team, and I ended up with weeks worth of back and forth trying to get their attention. It's not their fault. It's not their fault. They're overwhelmed. Procurement organizations, by and large, across the industry, are overwhelmed. So they have to pick and choose which projects they focus on. Well, they're going to look at many of the strategic projects and try to get savings there, but some of those even get beyond their view, right? Some of those just proceed with executive approval, and you don't get the savings. If you can take the time that is currently spent by all of those procurement professionals and have them guiding an agent or a set of agents to doing much of the, what we call, I mentioned grunt work, all of the research elements and much of the advising. If you can get that in place, and then also for certain kinds of purchases, allow that intelligence to feed straight over to the requester, to go to the business and say, hey, business, we trust you with Glow, with this agent, to be able to make your own purchase because we've put the right reasoning in place. We've put the right prompts and context in place that we trust you in collaboration with Glow to make your own decisions. Now you're going from backlog of hundreds of projects that will never get a look to getting every single one of those projects, every single one of those purchases, a really solid compete, a really solid set of potential suppliers that bid, and just crushing the numbers and really, really coming down in price. So it's really the value is in being able to address all of the spend at hand and getting the value, getting the savings, using the insights to really drive prices down.
I'm wondering, though, what this might be doing to procurement jobs, sourcing jobs. Is there any evidence so far of any expectation that the potential to automate a lot of this work will lead to job loss in that field?
We haven't seen it. I think it's naive to think that any field will not see some impact from AI. I mean, from agentic AI in particular, but for procurement, because these organizations are already so overwhelmed, these tools are simply an efficiency gain. We haven't seen any sort of massive layoffs of procurement professionals. We've only seen them take the tools and apply them and become 10 times more efficient. For the purposes of procurement, these tools magnify the effect so that you can actually get the work done rather than leaving a lot of work on the table.
There's often a talk about helping people to do higher valued work, but I always wonder about the reassignment path, let's call it, for reskilling or upskilling, or just giving them the training to do those higher value things. Are you seeing that among your customers, or at your company, do you have sort of a process where you and maybe your consulting wing or your partners will advise how to kind of move people beyond the rote tasks and kind of do more high value work?
This is actually a consistent conversation within our customer base. Absolutely, yes. And we do have answers for our customers around this. What are the skills that they're going to need? Well, they need to learn how to best interact with the agents, in our case, Glow. They need to learn how to best pose questions. They need to, in many cases, just learn to trust the answers that they're seeing. And come back to this notion of trust again and again. Trust in that case is really a main driver of value. If you get the team to trust the outputs of the AI, if the agentic system is producing the results that it should, then you're going to see higher utilization. You're going to see more projects coming through. But it takes, at first, in many cases, some handholding. I mean, it only makes sense. In the beginning, you have to get folks as comfortable as possible with using the tool as it's meant to be used, with letting go of certain elements of the task that they would do day to day and filling those tasks in with that more strategic work. So it's both a notion of get used to the tools and understand how agentic AI is really supposed to affect the process, and learn to an extent to let go of some of the things that you've done in the past, because you just don't need to do those anymore.
Mm-hmm. If you could project ahead, say 5 years, what does the typical procurement officers or workers sourcing job look like if the agentic AI, presumably it will, continue to learn and improve?
Yeah, it's interesting. I get the 3 to 5 year question on occasion, and it's increasingly difficult to answer a 3 to 5 year question, especially 5 years, because things change so quickly. I occasionally will cop out and say, well, I'll tell you what'll happen within 1 year. But I mean, the truth is, procurement function really has a lot of, there is a human element to it that I wouldn't count on losing. The procurement professional will only get more effective, and there will only be more interactions and deals that need to come to the table. I think within 5 years, you may see higher effectivity and reduced staff, but I wouldn't count on seeing the procurement function itself disappear. I think that there's enough experience, there's enough knowledge there, that the set of people that we see executing on procurement today will just have higher and higher effects. So they will provide the guidelines required for things like an autonomous negotiation process, right? For what essentially you're doing as a procurement professional in that case, in negotiation, is you're providing advice to the machine. You are advising the agent to act on your behalf, but to act in a certain way. Something about that supplier that the agent doesn't know. So you share it with the agent, and the agent goes off to use that on your behalf. It's really that melding, I think, that you'll see of the experience with the agent's capability and context that will get more and more, I guess, effective over time. It's going to take a while for it to have the effect that I think we'd like to see generally. And that has a lot to do with the sort of the notion of folks getting used to the tools and getting used to what they can do and what they should do versus what humans should do. But over time, you'll see that melding, and you'll see efficiency gains propagate throughout the organization.
Well, that's a pretty hopeful vision of how people could collaborate with.
I'm a hopeful person.
AI.
I think that I think there's a lot of positive here.
Well, Keith, I appreciate your coming on the podcast today. This has been fascinating.
Well, David, I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you, and thank you very much for having me on.
Thank you for listening to Enterprise Apps Unpacked, where we give the real story on the software that runs your business. To learn more about business applications, explore our content on searcherp.com. Find us on YouTube at our channel, Eye on Tech. Subscribe to our podcast to receive the latest episodes as they drop. And if you liked what you heard today, give us a rating and review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you're listening. Until next time.
Podcast programming and promotion by Kelsey Waddell. Podcast production and quality oversight by Anne Steshu. Music supplied by DP via Getty Images. This is an Informa TechTarget production.